Welcome back to another episode of Living Beyond the Shoreline. Today I'm joined by our regional sales manager for the Midwest. So, Kurt, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hey, Kurt Welch, man, thanks for the intro. Awesome. Excited to be on the Wave Armor podcast today. I don't know what episode this is. I think it's number 4. So that's a lucky number. I like that. Yeah, appreciate it. This is, we're actually out here in beautiful Buffalo on Buffalo Lake on the dock, on Wave Armor dock. Super exciting.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's actually the Wave Armor dock. So I know that we brought some samples and some stuff, and this guy's known as the dock dude. So I figured, there's no one better than Kurt to bring out on the dock to talk about docks. So give us a little bit, Kurt, relative to kind of, you've been here for 2 years, but you've had a long journey in the waterfront shoreline type products. And
I have.
And I think that lends itself to why consumers should start looking at Wave Armor like you did, right? Kind of that journey through the different industries. And I know a lot of times we talk about dock and we talk about the evolution of dock, right? And we go from steel, or actually wood to steel to aluminum to now the stuff that we're sitting on here, which is the high density polyethylene product.
Absolutely.
That Wave Armor is known for. But nonetheless, tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of why you ended up here at Wave Armor.
Yeah, so I started in the dock industry about 20 years ago. Another brand that actually carried both aluminum docks and boat lifts, and then a competing line of plastic products. And I've seen a lot of change in the industry, but also a lot of things actually stay the same with some of those companies. And I look at a company like Wave Armor. What drew me to Wave Armor was probably, at least from a professional side, how verticalized Wave Armor was. I mean, if you look at Wave Armor, as part of like the Rhino family of products, is one of the brands for Rhino. I look at just the brand itself of Wave Armor, just access to American Rototool, one of Rhino's companies. And American Rototool will make custom tools. So Wave Armor essentially can manufacture their own molds. They do their own mold maintenance, custom design. And I think part of that, you'll see the rapid growth. I think you've seen the rapid growth of Wave Armor over the last 5 to 10 years of just new products, new ideas, constant innovation, which is something that's almost unheard of in the industry. I mean, there are other companies that innovate as well, but in the purely floating dock and lift space, Wave Armor is 100% number one. And I think a lot of that comes just from the verticalization. I think our owner, Rick Johannick, is really big on having control of, the whole process from concept to prototype to finished product, and then continuing evolution from there. It's pretty iterative, where it's constantly changing. Things are constantly updating, which in some ways can be a little bit of a challenge if you're a dealer trying to keep up with everything. But if you look at any other industry that's growing, whether it's auto industry, boats, they're constantly changing all the time. So, I mean, if you just take the marine industry in general, if you look 10 years ago, the boats are completely different today in terms of electronics, even hull shapes, how people are using those boats. And Wave Armor essentially is able to kind of keep up with that. And I think part of that innovation and other parts of the industry also drive what we're doing over here on the Wave Armor.
Sure. I agree with everything you're saying, Kurt, and that is innovation. And it's a premium product. And it's, one thing you didn't touch on is that customer service piece of it, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of how that's intertwined through the organization, really the culture of the company is as we're going to take care of the customer. There's, when it comes to any manufacturing defects and any challenges that they have with the product for the most part. So let's move from that into what considerations to make when selecting a dock.
There's so many things to consider when you're selecting a dock. I think the first thing that, in my experience over the years, that I always ask people first when they're considering either purchasing a new dock or just redesigning their existing dock is just to figure out how you want to use the space, because that changes. If you're a first-time lake homeowner that really just likes to fish, you're probably going to have a different layout or a different, set of accessories and things than somebody that's got a big family that comes over for holidays and wants to entertain or do different things on the dock. So one of the first things I think that is important for people to consider is to just envision how you want to use the space over the next few years. Obviously, with a product like Wave Armor, it's very easy to reconfigure a dock, add things on, change things around. But just visualize that, that first summer, the first 2 or 3 summers on how you're going to primarily use the dock, and start there. So that'll really kind of drive some of the things like what the layout should look like, what you need, where you're going to park boats, If you've got, transient space where you need people to be able to tie up if they're going to come visit, just the types of activities that you're going to do on the dock are really going to drive some of the things you'll need on that dock.
And that might drive some of the limitations of some of the other brands too, right? Because they're rectangles in a lot of cases, right? You don't have the shapes and some of that adult Lego set, right? That have you with Wave Armor, right? Where you can actually configure however you want that dock. But even taking a step before you do that configuration, one thing that has really been impacting really across the United States this year is weather, right? And rain, water flow up and down, and some of those challenges that comes with the rising and falling of different water levels. And that is, you're always adjusting the traditional dock to the right height, right?
Yeah.
Where with the Wave Armor product, you kind of install it and forget it, if you want to call it that, right? When it comes relative to the changing in water levels. So definitely. I think that's a key piece too, is what's that water change look like on your lake?
Yeah.
If you see a lot of variance in that, a floating dock is probably a good solution. And then you can start looking at, Wave Armor and some of our competitors, and then make that decision for yourself. Selfishly or, biasly, we feel like our product's the best, and that's why we're both here, right? So,
absolutely.
So again, I think, kind of what that water fluctuation looks like, the layout, as you mentioned, would be a key piece. When you move from the concept of a layout in your mind, talk about some of the tools that Wave Armor has, whether it be the dock builder, some of the different shapes, that adult Lego set type thing, that 3 to 5 year plan, kind of go through some of those things.
Sure. Yeah. The dock builder, even if you would have mentioned it, that would have been number one for me. I talked to so many people. And my job primarily is, assisting dealers, helping dealers grow, helping dealers in their business. But I have a lot of opportunity to talk to consumers, whether it's at retail shows. Sometimes I'll get a phone call from a consumer that's looking at purchasing a new dock or a new port. And the number one thing I always say is, they're describing their vision to me, I can start to sketch it out for them. But I'll always drive them to the Wave Armor website, go to the dock builder. The tool out there is absolutely amazing. And it's a good starting point. It's a platform to be able to have further conversations with either other family members, with your dealer, and for a dealer to even have conversations with us at Wave Armor. All of the product that's out there, if you look at the pure number of sizes of sections that Wave Armor offers. So we've got, the 60 by 120s, the 40 by 120s, wider 80 by 120s that are all good for complete layouts, 5 by 5 sections, essentially, lower deck units, curb sections, wedges. You've got probably more options to create whatever layout you want to look at with Wave Armor than you find with anybody else. And to me, that's huge from a consumer. It can also be confusing, but when you can take all of those pieces and just start to create a layout, if there are challenges or if there's some weak points or strong points that maybe you've missed, having that layout that's saved that you can share with the dealer, share with Wave Armor, is something you can take a look at and then have a discussion around. And somebody like myself or somebody like your dealer can actually go through and help you identify areas where, maybe if we added a section here or changed this, it's going to perform a little bit better in certain, maybe it's wind conditions or a current in a river or something like that. But it's a good starting point. So that dock builder is always number one, probably right off the bat, just to get an idea. The fun stuff comes after that, I think, where you're kind of considering things like, benches, some of the accessories and those things. But starting with that layout is kind of key. I think a lot of people, you could go either way. So some consumers will start with the basic dock, maybe it's just 30 feet out with an L section, and they have plans down the road to go longer or wider or create a slip or something else. And then it's almost a 50-50 split. Sometimes the consumer will start with their dream dock, no budget considered, or we're just going to go with everything we ever want, get that quote, get that estimate, figure it out, and then say, all right, we're not going to do that full thing this year. We'll come back and do it a year or 2 or 3 later, and then kind of scale back to what they need just today. But now they've got the idea and the vision of what is possible. And I like that. It's always easier for me to start with, what is your absolute dream? What do you want? And then kind of narrow that down to what do you actually need just today? And then we'll kind of build off of that as we go forward.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that we talk a lot about, is that 3 to 5 year plan, right? And again, build that dream dock, then scale it down to, here's my plan for year 1, here's my plan for year 2, or here's my plan for year 3. And that 3rd year, you have that dream dock, right? And you can, it's easier to digest, a bite size. I can spend this year, this next year. And ultimately, it's that gift that kind of keeps on giving. We don't know what to buy. You go add some additional dock, you add the accessories, and it really creates that gift-giving experience, right?
Definitely.
Talk to me a little bit about what makes wave armor when it comes to dock specifically. I know we've got a little prop with us today to kind of illustrate some of those things,
Sure.
but I'll let you kind of take the lead on that.
Yeah, so wave armor, just the dock itself, obviously like innovation, number one. I think the plastic, maintenance-free, rotomolded, HDPE. So how we're a little bit different. So everybody that manufactures, say, a rotomolded dock, I guess I shouldn't say everybody, but most manufacturers of rotomolded dock do things kind of similar, with just small differences, small variances, maybe in the thickness of the plastic, possibly in like the size or shape of the recessed areas underneath. So what wave armor does differently is wave armor rotomolds the float as like a one-piece unit, and foam fills that float. So what that does is it adds a little bit of weight, a little bit of mass, which adds to stability. You've still got the recessed areas underneath the wave armor dock. And then we actually take the deck, which is also rotomolded, and that's basically bolted onto the float. So you've essentially got like a two-piece dock section, essentially. I don't know if we've got this on video, if we can show this, but when you look at, can you see this? So if you look at like the wave armor dock system here, essentially just the flagstone pattern itself just lends itself, most consumers that we talk to absolutely love it. It works well in both like a residential situation or a commercial, municipal, campground, resort, restaurant. So it's got a broad appeal. Some competing brands essentially have more of an industrial look, or maybe it's a little bit too residential. And again, I always go back to wave armor owning that space, owning American Roto Tools. So we're basically doing our own mold maintenance, those kind of things. So you always get quality out of wave armor. But the design of the dock itself, I always look at, if you just take, say, a competing brand, say, and I won't name any of them, but if they're not foam filled, there's a lot of air in there inside that dock, even if they've got the recessed areas. And what happens is when you get out in the sunlight, there's a lot of air. That air wants to expand, so you've got to vent that out, essentially. So when you look at the difference here on the wave armor system, you've got foam inside the float, flat, floats inside the water. There's no issue there. You've got a lot of support structure. Obviously, if you do get a puncture or penetration by something, if it cracks for some reason, that foam is not going to allow that float to fill with water and sink. But the beauty, I think, of the wave armor system is this rotomolded deck bolted onto the float, because if you look, there's a lot less area inside of this. You can kind of see here on the deck system itself, there's a lot less area. So it's a thick material. You don't necessarily have to vent it. The kiss-offs, there are literally hundreds of kiss-offs per section. And what these kiss-offs are, I don't know if it shows on the video, but what these kiss-offs end up doing is they create like a structure, almost like a foundational pile that you'll find in construction, where everywhere you step, you're stepping on a kiss-off, and those provide support. So what happens with the wave dock system is you don't end up with soft spots. If there is a kiss-off in there for some reason that happens to be a little bit loose, because there are hundreds of them on there, you're not going to find it tending to bubble like you will with some of the other brands. I know from experience, just based on research of looking at the other brand, I spent a ton of time looking at floating docks in my past experience, cutting them out, looking at them. Most of the competitors have far fewer kiss-offs than you'll find on the wave dock system. So not only do you have the deck,
so ultimately that prevents deflection, right?
It really does.
Yeah. So there's no deflection. When you walk on it, you bounce on it, you don't get that deflection, which you may find on a competitive product versus ours.
And that's huge on a floating dock, because a floating dock just in general is going to have some movement. It's designed to allow the dock to float up and down, however it's anchored.
Sure.
So there's always going to be that vertical component of movement on a floating dock, no matter which brand you've got. So if you've got a soft spot as you're stepping on a dock, or a high spot, that tends to kind of give you the feeling of instability or kind of uncertainty when you're walking on the dock, and you don't find that with the wave armor at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, a couple things from my vantage point too, Kurt, is that black float does a nice job of hiding that water line, right? Versus a single piece where it's all tan or all gray. You're going to see that water line where the black truly camouflages that water line. So it does a very nice job with that. The other piece that we'll come back to, and I'll let you talk a little bit about it, but if you want to rotate that to the bottom and show those holes, and essentially that's kind of like creates a suction cup in the water. So if you go back to your grade school days, right? And you took that red Solo cup, dipped it under the water, right? And as he came to the surface, there was resistance.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you see with this dock and why it's so stable on the water, factored with the foam and that additional weight that kind of comes with that. So
Absolutely.
to me, those couple things are kind of breakers in regards to what separates Wave Armor from the competition. And the next piece I'll let you talk to, and you can kind of see it here in this cutout, is our proprietary connector, which is what we call an H channel or H beam. And if you, I'll let you kind of go into that, Kurt, and just kind of explain what that looks like and how that works.
The H-beam system is absolutely, it's kind of a game changer. It's absolutely awesome. So you will probably get into it a little bit later on some of my favorite installs or something like that. Maybe some of yours, Ben.
Yeah.
But I look at the H-beam system in general on Wave Armor essentially is designed, if you can imagine, the dock, if you've got another section of dock here, you've essentially got an H shape, and that H-beam is designed to slide into that and lock in place with the slots on top. So you've got a one-piece connector that slides into the two dock sections, which gives you complete rigidity between those two sections. There's just enough movement where it'll allow it to flex some, but that H-beam locks those things in. So when you've got an entire dock system with sections all locked together using H-beams, it reduces the wave energy. When waves are coming into the dock and you've got, a number of sections of dock all locked together, that whole system is going to move versus individual sections moving. The other thing that I absolutely love about the H-beam system, just based on my experience in connecting other floating dock systems together, is just about everybody else has a two-part connector, and they typically will connect on the bottom and the top. So what you find is, whether you're doing it in the water, if you're trying to do an install over the ice, it's always hard to get that bottom one on or the top one on. And because it's a two-part system, there's a lot of potential for those to become loose. We don't find that at all with the Wave Armor system. It truly is probably how all dock systems should have been designed.
Yeah. No, it's definitely very well thought out. Rick did a nice job when he built that, him and the team. So
Absolutely.
It makes our job a little bit easier, right? When we can go out there and sell a product like this and feel confident that, it's something that we would spend our money on, right?
Definitely.
And, it creates an easy opportunity for us as a sales team. We talked a little bit about the dock itself. Talk about some of the unique installs that you've seen and kind of maybe some highlights. I mean, I usually ask everyone that's on here, what's your favorite product? But
yeah,
I'll ask you. Hopefully you say, let's see what you say.
My favorite product is Wave Dock.
Yeah.
100%. I absolutely love our dock system.
Yeah.
I love all of our product, and I think that we do a better job really across the full product line than just about anybody else. Definitely than anybody else. But docks are my favorite. Docks to me are the component. It's almost like if you look at like a handrail on a gangway or something. There's always the part that's kind of the human interaction component, the part you touch and feel. To me, that's what a dock is. We're out here sitting on the dock now. At some point, if we felt like sunbathing, we'd be out here laying on the dock. It's the part that you spend time on, per se. The lifts, they're a little more functional. You're protecting your investment in a boat with a boat lift, but the docks, it's your personality, how you create it, how you lay it out, how you use it. It really tells a story about who you are as a lake homeowner. And just from a functionality standpoint of Wave Dock, you can't beat it when you compare it to a traditional style dock, whether it's a roll-in style or a sectional style or any other style of dock. The Wave Dock, floating Wave Dock system truly is the best dock that you can buy out there. It really is.
I agree. Favorite install?
Yeah, favorite install. There's a number of them. I would say my favorite was probably, it's a smaller one, so I don't have a big crazy story on commercial jobs are fun because it's a lot of section and you just run them right out. My favorite install is probably one that we did, I want to say it was in March. It's a small one, a residential dock system. I actually helped Mick over at Lake Region Dock put it in. We did it on the ice. I think we got there at, it was 10:30 in the morning. I think there was 5 or 6, 7 sections. 80 by 120s, 50 by 120s. And eventually that customer came back this summer and bought a X24 and put that in. But we started about 10:30 and we were done in time for a late lunch. It was absolutely awesome. Right on the ice. There was open water out in front because the neighbor had a bubbler out there. So it was a little sketchy and the ice was just starting to melt. I think it was about 35 degrees that day. So, and this particular customer was in a spot where, again, there's nothing guaranteed with an ice install or leaving your dock frozen in, but He was in a location where generally you would think it's probably going to be a safe spot. It was tucked back in a bay. Again, the neighbor had a bubbler out there, so they're kind of protecting from some of that ice anyways. And that customer absolutely loved it. Go ahead.
So you bring up an interesting point, ice and wave armor, right? And I know you're touching on it a little bit. I don't want to skip over it, right? I truly want to spend a little bit of time in this space for our people that live up north. Ice, obviously you talked about an ice install. What do you do in the winter months for those that have this product, and what are some of the different ways that you can use it in the winter?
In some really, really calm protected areas, you almost have to do nothing. You can basically just freeze it in. In areas where you're a little bit more susceptible to maybe some shifting or some movement in the ice, a lot of folks will take all of the pipe out, let it freeze in, pull the pipe out, rest it on the dock, put the pipe on shore. Whether it's all of your pipe, all of your anchorage locations, sometimes you'll just leave a couple of them on there. If you do happen to leave those pipe in, a lot of times what'll happen in the right spot, again, you got to remember
it's lake contingent, right?
Yeah, it's definitely contingent upon the location in the lake, and even just the season. Things can change. You can get a weird season where wind shifts or whatever, but even at some of those locations where they've left them in and they've been in the lake for 5, 10, 15 years, and you get that one season where the ice did shift or push, a lot of times what happens is the pipe will kind of bend or kind of pull itself out and drift over. So then you're going back and resetting those things. But there's absolutely nothing better than to be able to just leave that dock in the right location, not have to worry about it. You're the first dock in, first dock out because it stays in, is absolutely awesome. I think some other things that people will do.
Just to that point, Kurt, before you go there, I hate to interrupt you here, but
no, you're good.
The dock we're sitting on has been frozen in for 3 or 4 years. So you know what I mean? So living proof, we're sitting on a dock that gets frozen in.
Think of the beauty of that. So I've owned a traditional sectional dock, and putting it in is not fun, but it's doable. It's the beginning of the year. You're kind of excited to get it in. I dread fall, September, October. And usually it's like you dread it, so you're waiting. And by the time you finally do it, it's the worst time ever, and you hate it even worse. It's horrible. The wave dock system, you're right. The fact that this dock has been, you would never guess it. I don't know if we're going to get any shots, pan around, look at the dock. It's probably a system that's on the catalog, but you would never guess that this dock has been frozen in on the ice, even over last winter. I think that, just you go back to a little bit what some people will do with, if you are in a location where you can freeze it in, on some rivers and some locations, the dealer or a lot of times a marina will actually take everybody's dock and tie them all together and float them up to a calm section of the river where there's not a lot of ice movement. And then in some other locations, sometimes you'll pull all the pipe, tie it up once it's frozen in, tie it to a post or a tree on shore with enough slack. Obviously, safety is key. There's a lot of people in Minnesota that love to snowmobile and get out on the lakes, ice fishing or whatever. So lights, flags, anything you can do to kind of help, just notify that there's a dock there potentially under the snow is kind of key as well. And again, it's not for everybody. There are some locations where you just simply can't do that. And a lot of times your service provider will go in, and if they can pull a sectional dock or a wheeling dock or boat lifts out, they've got a fork barge typically, they'll just treat the wave dock system pretty much the same way. They'll either take it out in a couple sections or section by section, stack them up on shore, and it'll be ready to go back in the next season.
So, one thing we talk about is just the usability and the universal usability of the product. So when it comes to the wave armor product, there's different ways to install. Have you ever seen any limitations relative to, there are some limitations probably on coastal waters, right, where you've got some big waves and some of that stuff, but you don't have to use just pipes to mount the dock, right? There's different ways to mount the dock depending upon kind of your area. Can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah. So if you look, across, so like in my territory, the Midwest, it's pretty varied. So I'll really go from Minnesota and the Dakotas all the way down to Missouri, and occasionally I'll touch down into that corner of Arkansas or into Oklahoma. Anchorage is, I pretty much see all of it. Every kind of anchorage option you can imagine. So in deeper water, a lot of times you'll use like a chain anchor system. We've actually done a couple of those over in Devil's Lake, where they'll actually just run a chain or cable, attached up to the connection bracket on the dock, and cross those down to big concrete deadman anchors in the lake bottom, essentially. And what that does is it allows that dock to stay in place and kind of float. As the water levels drop down, it'll either move or you'll tighten up those chains to kind of keep that thing in place. A lot of times on the river, I'm actually working with like Mike right now to try to develop something out, just a kit for a stiff arm. So guys are using a stiff arm system. Right now you can use our T-plates and you can kind of fab something up, you can make it work. But stiff arms are really key over in Wisconsin Rapids, anywhere along the river where typically your dock is going to go parallel to shore. And you've either got a lot of rock on the bottom where you can't drive a typical pipe, or it just doesn't make sense to use pipe. So you'll run a stiff arm out from shore out to the dock, and that'll hold the dock in place. So whether it's anchorage, stiff arm, chain anchor system, or a cable winch mount system, just to hold that dock in place. I mean, there's literally pipe
different ways.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be just poles, right? You can do pilings, you can do different things. So again, it talks about the universality of the product, right? So it's pretty cool to see that. One of the things that we constantly hear, right, is I can't believe how stable it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, can you give us any testimonials kind of in that space?
That's part of the reason I love it. The perception of a floating dock is that they're unstable. And I think a lot of that comes from, you mentioned earlier, on just the progression of docks just in general over the years, from a wood dock to a steel dock to an aluminum dock to plastic. And all of those different styles or materials, wood, steel, aluminum, have all had a floating component at some point built in. And if you take a typical wood dock with your regular dock floats underneath there, you don't have, again, the recessed areas we talked about earlier, which add a lot of stability, that suction that you talked about on those recessed areas of the dock. So if you take any other dock system that's floating in general, and you look at having regular floats on that dock, as you walk on one side of, just take a section of that dock, walk on one side, it's going to want to tip one way, walk to the other side, it's going to want to tip the other way. So a lot of times the pipe brackets themselves are trying to hold that and create some of the stability. So the docks tend to want to wobble as you're walking on them. Wave armor, because of the recessed areas, because they're foam filled, because of the way that they're constructed, the stability on a wave armor dock system is like second to none. I've talked to dealers that are people that are both customers of ours, dealers of ours, and then even people that sell other brands. And when they walk on a wave armor system, they're blown away by the stability. And now typically with that stability, we introduced, I think it was last year, that 80 by 120 dock section, very wide. The wider you go with your dock sections, the more stable it's going to be. The wider you create your layout, for instance, patios or slips, T-shapes, those kind of things are going to be more stable. But a 60 by 120, 80 by 120 dock system, if you're using that to create your layouts, it's absolutely phenomenal in terms of stability. I don't know if you can see us sitting on the dock here. There are waves coming in, but we're not really moving at all.
No, it's pretty windy today, actually. Yeah. And I think the other thing too, kind of an aha moment for me, was we had our dealer meeting right last fall, and we had that 80 by 120 out on the water. Yeah. And just to watch people walk on it, our dealers, right, who sell our product. Some of them are south where they maybe don't sell as much of our wave armor dock, the wave dock. But for them just to get their reactions, it's like, and that was the first time I walked on it too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so stable. So again, a great product. I think what I want to do is just kind of wrap up at this point. I think we kind of went through a lot of the high level type stuff. Anything that you feel like we missed that we should probably touch on?
Yeah, I think, aside from accessories, just the docks in general, I always like to say, especially if you're a consumer looking at, building a wave dock system, it's pretty easy to get a price, but don't be afraid to just go out and design your, dream dock essentially, or even just the dock that you want to start with, and get that in front of a dealer. Reach out to us. It's very easy to just say, here's what you've got. Here's a general idea of what it's going to cost, and let you go from there. I think it's key. I think dealers are very important to the process, especially in helping you figure out what's going to work and which, how to lay your dock out. But yeah, I think don't be afraid to kind of create the layout that you want. I've seen some unique ones, and I've seen them both on the dock builder and then turned into a real dock. And I'm surprised that they look really nice when they're out on the water.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I mean, the docks that, we build docks all the time, but somebody new coming in, that creativity is pretty cool to see.
They got a different idea.
And before you know it, one of us has an employee configured that, one employee has that one configured just like that, right? Because it's super cool. So don't be afraid to experiment. With that, we'll wrap it up. You may live by the water, but do you live on the water?